She whispered, and then he was gone. It was 6 words that fit in a breath and broke an entire life. In a kitchen lit by candle flame and an oil lamp, a confession floated across a room of wooden chairs and patched tablecloths and landed in the lap of a man who had never imagined leaving. The voice was quiet, almost routine, yet the man on the other side of the room was holding a small recording, and every syllable became evidence. In a plain community where routine held families together like well-tied knots, a single whisper set a seam to unravel. Imagine the smell of wood shavings, the scratch of a chair leg on a plank floor, the thin scent of boiled coffee, the rustle of apron fabric, and a light that trembled with the breath of a house that would not be the same. What would you do if the person you had trusted with your life admitted, without heat, that they wanted you gone? Consider that as you listen, because this is a story of routine, betrayal, and a quiet kind of justice. He heard the recording the way someone hears rain against a roof, patient and unavoidable. The couple had been married for 15 years and lived in a rammed earth house near a small village of barn roofs and horse paths. He carved furniture in a low-ceiling workshop behind the house, his hands split and sure, his work known in 3 counties. She kept the home, managed the fields, and wore the same plain dress style each day, her hair neatly pinned, her voice steady. That afternoon, the normal cadence of chores and prayers dissolved into a single clear line that would be repeated in courtrooms of gossip and in the hush of kitchens. The plan he made afterward was not a shout or a scandal. It was paperwork, patience, and images. His response would be as quiet as the bread rising in the oven, as precise as the dovetail joint he measured twice. He would not raise a voice, he would not throw stones. He would write a new life in the ledger of small, unassuming acts. The recorded scene began with a knocked bowl and a chair pulled too close to the table. Voices were low and practical. "Did you mail the letter to Levi?" "No, I kept it. There is something else." "What do you mean, something else?" "I mean him. I mean that I do not want him here. I do not love him the way people expect." "Are you sure? He is the one who keeps the workshop warm for winter." "I am sure. I want him gone." The man in the corner did not speak. He breathed. The candle guttered and the recorder clicked. The woman, who would later be called Ruth by neighbors in whispered retellings, spoke the last line with the same texture as boiling water. The friend in the next room, Miriam, replied. "You cannot say that as if it is nothing," Ruth answered. "Consider it said." The exchanges were small and domestic, and they became legal in the ears of someone who had always believed in testimony and in the slow certainty of facts. After the recorder stopped, the man walked out of the kitchen into the winter light. He touched the handle of the workshop door, smelled the varnished tub and the dust of pine. He thought of his father teaching him to plane a board until the grain shone. He remembered promises made at a simple wedding, vows spoken under an old elm, hands clasped in front of 7 witnesses. Those memories hardened into a purpose that felt less like revenge and more like a correct response to a wrong. He would assemble proofs, not weapons. He would gather witnesses, not accusations. He would protect what he could with methodical steps that would expose the truth without spectacle. He would sell, settle, and leave. He would be gone before anyone could fashion a parade from his disappearance. The confession scene remained a small group of voices that needed to be shown in detail because the moral weight landed in the silences between words. In the kitchen, the exchange stretched longer than the recorder did because the man later reconstructed it for neighbors and for a notary named Amish who kept records at the village meeting house. In that retelling, there were 8 full exchanges, each one a pebble thrown into still water. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "Who else knows?" "Only Miriam and Hannah." "Will you sign anything?" "Not yet." "Will you leave a note?" "No." "Do you want to be free?" "Yes." "Do you know what follows?" "I do." The man listened to the cadence, to the way laundry sighed on the line outside, to the rasp of a chair being pushed back, to the faint clop of a buggy wheel on the lane. These were details he catalogued as if for evidence, sensory marks that grounded the testimony in place and time. At a third of the way through what would become public gossip, pause here for a moment and think how you would react. If you were the one who heard a spouse whisper that they wanted you gone, would you confront them? Would you record the words and keep them? Would you leave silently in the night? Comment beginning with "I would" to tell us your first move. This is not an invitation to judge, but a request to share how ordinary people respond to extraordinary breaches of trust. Your answers will be read in future reflections because every community has many ways to measure a rupture. He did not storm the meeting house. He did not storm the neighbor Ruth had confided in. Instead, he planned with the care of a craftsman. He named people he could trust. On a list were Eli, a cousin who drove the wagon to the market; Jacob, the lender who handled barter
and cash for urgent expenses; Sarah, a cousin who kept a ledger of property exchanges; Levi, a buyer from a Mennonite settlement who agreed to look at furniture and house lots; Amos, the notary who could prepare transfer papers in a way that held up before the community elders; Hannah, the neighbor who could testify to voices in the house; and Miriam, who had been present in the room at the confession. He spoke to each in hushed tones among wooden beams and straw bales. The plan required quiet money, a buyer who would not ask too many questions, and a notary willing to process a sale cleanly, with the paper record standing like a witness when people later spoke in the market. He photographed the carvings he had made, cataloged the marks on each table, documented the list of creditors, and placed items he could not part with into a locked trunk. Each step was sensory, tactile: the weight of a coin, the rasp of a signature against paper, the cold of the ink bottle, the smell of candle wax as documents dried. The execution began with phone calls that were more like messages passed along by intermediaries. Though they shunned most worldly noise, the community had ways of moving information. He met with Levi in a barn lit by lantern, and they spoke with an economy of words. "Are you buying the house and workshop?" Levi asked, the light catching the edges of his hat. "Yes," the man replied, "at price that covers debts and the sale for Ruth." "Will the family be informed?" "Yes, but not as a scandal, a simple sale." "And the furniture?" "Included." "What of the tools?" "Included, except those I keep in storage." "When?" "1 week." Each exchange was careful and repeated to witnesses, including Eli and Jacob, who nodded in the straw and smelled the horse and felt the smooth grain of a bench under their palms. The notary Amos required signatures and a witness list. Sarah sat with a candle and a quill and wrote names with a hand that trembled at the smallest. There were 8 direct exchanges in that meeting, each turning a moral problem into a paper solution. He arranged a sale as if assembling a chest, each dovetail locked in place. The climax came on a morning when frost rimed the porch, and the pale light filled the house like sifted milk. He signed the transfer at the meeting house. The new owner, Levi, handed over a sum that satisfied creditors and paid a small buffer for expenses. There was no shouting, no courtroom moment, only the sound of ink settling and of horses nickering outside. Ruth learned of the transfer by a folded note left on the table. She read 2 lines, set the paper down, and then walked out into the yard where she faced neighbors who had gathered more out of curiosity than malice. In a sequence of exchanges that matched the earlier scenes, for
intensity, she asked, "Why?" He answered with the exactness of someone who had been hurt and chosen order. "Because you said you wanted me gone, and because I will not fight you with noise." "Did you sell everything?" "The house and workshop, yes." "Where will you go?" "I will leave with what I need to begin again." "Will you take the children?" "Not now." "Why leave like this?" "Because silence can be a safer answer than battle." The signatures, the notary stamp, the exchange of money, and the closing of the workshop door all condensed into the legal finality that changed ownership and changed lives. The immediate consequence was the social equivalent of a roof tile slipping from place. Neighbors chose sides. Some, like Hannah and Miriam, whispered support and testified to what they had heard. Others, like Amos the notary, remained neutral because their role was a civic one. Jacob refused to lend cash afterward because commerce felt risky. Sarah called distant cousins who weighed in with advice that was heavy with tradition. The man found himself blocked on market exchanges and in some social invitations. Though he had moved quietly, the empty space of the house broadcast absence. Children passed on the lane looked down. A landlord in the next township refused to rent to him initially because rumors preceded the facts. He found solace only in the workshop trunk where his father had left a plane, in the smell of boiled coffee on an open stove when dawn came, and in the knowledge that the sale had been lawful and recorded. The community reacted like weather to a sudden thaw, shifting loyalties as fences tilted and friendships settled into new positions. His backstory explains both the patience of his plan and the precision of his actions. He had been a boy who learned to whittle on a porch while his mother hummed hymns. His father had been a craftsman who believed that the shape of a chair could teach a man how to stay steady through grief. As a child, he watched his older brother leave the community for a life that smelled of city smoke and never return. The boy then vowed to root himself in craft and in modest pleasures. He apprenticed in a nearby shop, learning how to set joinery so tight that a table would hold through centuries. He married a woman whose hands were gentle in the kitchen and whose laughter knit friends together. When the harvest failed one year and creditors came calling, he learned the language of ledgers and barter. He held fast to the principle that a promise meant more than comfort, that work could redeem a day, and that silence could be more honest than anger. In his 30s, he had lost a brother to an accident in the fields and had refused to leave the community, to chase grief with anger. That refusal taught him to answer wrongdoing with measured acts, to gather witnesses and facts rather than wrath.
This past shaped him into someone who believed that the most potent vengeance was a life rebuilt on right accounts and clear paper, not one stained with scandal. Throughout the narrative, there were 3 moments of tightened tension that demanded slow, detailed attention. The first moment occurred when he sat in the workshop after the confession and debated whether to record more of their conversation or to confront them at once. The silence in the room was heavy with the scent of beeswax and shavings. His fingers hovered over the recorder while the wind made the candle flame bow. He imagined confronting her, imagined the sound of a slammed door, imagined neighbors gathering. He chose the recorder and the slow build of documents instead of a confrontation. The second moment was at the sale table when Ruth first saw the transfer paper. Her face flushed like a barn wall warmed by sun, and for a heartbeat everyone held a breath that tasted of iron and candle drippings. She asked questions that were measured, almost hollow, and he answered with calm edges that cut because they were precise. The third moment came when he packed the last trunk and locked the workshop door for the first time in decades. He felt the plane of a lifetime in his palms and wondered if he had done right. He smelled cedar in the trunk and the cold air of the yard, and then closed the door. Each tension scene was a small storm of sensation and choice, and each required paragraphs to let the reader feel the pressure before release. In the months that followed, he rebuilt in a way that honored both craft and conscience. 1 month after the sale, he had moved to a small rented room near a creek, his trunk open on the floor and his tools laid out in order. He worked early and late, the rasp of plane and the smell of fresh-cut wood filling the small space. He received occasional visits from Eli, who brought news of the village and who helped him find work at a neighboring homestead. The ledger showed modest savings and a list of commissions that would keep him busy. He met a woman named Naomi at a market who appreciated his tables and who brought him apples and conversation. He was not yet healed, but the rhythm of work steadied him. 3 months later, he had a modest contract to make benches for a meeting house renovation. Jacob vouched for him in a business letter, and the community that once kept him at arm's length began to see that he was earning honestly and quietly. He had repaid a lingering debt to a lender and had purchased a small parcel of land for a new shed where he planned to keep a single plane and a widowmaker table. He kept in touch with Hannah and Miriam, who by then had become allies who testified to what they had seen and heard. The sale had left Ruth with housing secured by a cousin and a small cash settlement. She had begun to attend gatherings less frequently, as if retreating into a private season of guilt and of thought.
6 months on, he had re-established a workshop with 3 new apprentices and a steady flow of orders that allowed him to hire Levi, who had previously been a buyer, to deliver goods. His reputation as a craftsman grew beyond the whispers. He reconceived his life not as an exile but as a redirection. Ruth had moved to a distant relative and had not remarried. Some in the village now spoke of the episode with a softer voice, saying that sometimes people make choices that hurt and that the law of quiet answers can be kind. Others never forgave and kept their distance. In numbers, the end looked like this. 1 month after the sale, he had saved enough to cover 3 months of living expenses. 3 months after the sale, he had repaid a loan of $200 and had a steady order book. 6 months after the sale, he employed 3 assistants and had regained his standing in 2 trading circles. The moral residue of the story was complicated. He had lost a marriage and a chapter of his life, but he had reconceived himself and had found work, community, and a measure of peace that did not require another person to validate it. The conclusion that settled on the street like fresh hay was both stern and gentle. She had whispered that she wanted him gone. He had answered that wish with departure and with a life rebuilt on honest labor and documented facts. The house changed hands, the workshop closed, and the community rearranged its loyalties. The lesson was not simple revenge. It was that silence, when applied as a form of boundary and combined with lawful action, could be a tool of survival. It was that integrity could be preserved by paper and witness as much as by words. If this story moves you, write in the comments beginning with "I would" and share what you would do in that kitchen. Subscribe for more stories that examine how ordinary choices lead to extraordinary changes. Consider how a whisper can become a turning point, and remember that sometimes the quietest answers are the most definitive.